Let's break down a track. What's going on, guys? Matt aka Martiln here, and welcome back to my first video of 2020. So last year, just before Christmas time, I released a new track called Simulation, which you can go and check out now over on Spotify, iTunes, blah 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 blah, all that fun stuff. But what I thought would be a really cool idea to do, seeing as I've got such a good reception from the tune, is to do a bit of a breakdown of the track. Now, unlike my past track breakdowns, I'm going to split this one up over a few different videos so that I can really focus on some certain topics and also just make the videos a little bit easier for you guys to consume. So let me know what you think of this new video format, and let's dive right in with the first part of the video. Let's break down some of the verses. Okay, so here I am inside of the session for Simulation, and what we're going to do for this first part of this video series of the Simulation track breakdown is look at the verses, basically, and how this track kind of came together. So this track actually came together as part of one of the Beat Collective Fortnightly Challenge rounds, which is a challenge that the community that I run, Beat Collective, we put on every fortnight, where we send out 2 samples, and then everyone has a chance to download those samples, have 2 weeks to work with them, and submit them back to the forum just for some feedback, and so you get a chance to just essentially create music to a deadline. So that was what this one was for, and just for a bit of context, I guess I'll play you the 2 samples that we used for this round. So those are the 2 samples provided by Beat Collective community member Ben Murphy, otherwise known as Ben at Work. Awesome samples, thank you so much. If you've heard the track, you will be able to instantly recognize those 2 samples. If you haven't, I would recommend stopping the video and going and listening to it now so you get more out of it. But yeah, those samples I used quite a bit throughout the tune, and first off, let's just show you how I used them in the verse sections and how I created the verse sections in general. So starting right at the top of the track, basically we have this kind of atmospheric chordal intro, which is really only a few layers and sounds like this. Cool, so as you probably heard, quite nice and atmospheric sounding, but like I said, really only a few layers. I actually started this little section here, I think with the chord progression that I will get into later, but I used this little technique that is in one of my previous videos, which I'll link down in the description or something, but created some atmospheric percussion using that second guitar sample. So what I did, I chopped it up and I put it into the Beats warp mode, pitched it up a little bit, and did some mucking around with the transient envelope right here, and then added some delay, some auto pan, some filter movement and stuff to get it to sound like this. You can see I also added in some automation here of some gain and some auto filter to just try and fade it in at the start. But basically what this chain is kind of doing, I'm just cutting out a lot of the low end with the channel EQ, then I've got an auto pan, just kind of slowly panning it from left to right. And then where a lot of this sound kind of comes from is this middle auto filter right here, this kind of bandpass auto filter. And I've got on here an LFO that's also set to spin, which basically means it slightly detunes the left and the right LFO from each other. So you kind of get them slightly in phase at the start, and then they kind of go out of phase until they kind of come slightly back into phase or whatever. And you just get a really nice movement between the left and the right speakers. And then again, some more auto pans, some delay and reverb, and then a little bit of a compressor at the end just to kind of squash it down a little bit and catch some of those peaks that are in there. And it creates a really, really nice atmosphere to start the track. And I also use this later on in the second verse and in the outro as well. The next main thing that probably is a good idea to talk about is this pad, which is kind of forms most of the bases for both of the, I should call them verse A sections. And it's probably one of the most recognizable sounds of the tune, which is actually just a Ableton preset that I mucked around with a little bit. And on its own sounds like this. And basically all I did was drag in this Abilene winter pad preset and automated some of the filter movement and changed some of the macro controls here to just get it to sound how I wanted. I think I might have gone in and mucked with a few other settings and stuff as well in here, but there's some EQ and chorus and stuff that's already kind of doing what I want it to do. And especially because I was trying to work really quickly to a deadline, just dragging in a preset like this that already sounded quite nice, and I was able to kind of muck around with a little bit to get to sound how I wanted it to sound, made the process just really, really quick and easy and simple. And the chords that are playing are also really, really simple. They're only 3-note chords, but because they're so open and wide, again, gives this verse a nice sense of atmosphere going on here. So the first chord that we've got here is just a straight up E minor chord. Second chord that we've got going on is a G major 7 chord. We're not playing the third though, so kind of ambiguous. Next chord we've got is an A major chord, which kind of gives it that slightly different feel, I suppose. You would expect it to go to like this A minor chord, but we're going to an A major chord instead. Which I can do a little bit of a video on like different modes and modal mixture and stuff like that later on if you guys want me to. And then as a bit of like a passing chord back to the E, we have this B minor chord right here. So there's really only like 2-3 more layers that are important in this kind of section. We have this short little, well not short, we have this little piece of ambience right here that I just grabbed from a sample pack and then filtered to make it just kind of really in the background. I think it's just kind of some insect swampy like sounds. Super, super quiet. You probably can't even hear it, but like it just adds this nice little bit of background noise, and again adds to the atmosphere, the ambience of the track. And then halfway through this verse A part, I bring in the bass and the guitar melody to kind of tease what's coming up in the verse B section. The bass is just playing the root notes, and this guitar melody I made by just chopping up that first sample that you would have heard. And down here is actually, you can see me chopping it all up, rearranging it, warping it, and everything like that, just to make sure that it's all in time and sounds really, really cool. I also did a bunch of processing on this guitar sound. This first audio effect rack here turns on during this part, the verse B, but after that we've got some just compression and EQ, some distortion running through some different things, phaser, just kind of giving the sound a bit of movement, a bit of texture, a bit of character, more so than the kind of clean electric guitar sound had originally. So I'm just going to skip over the verse B section for the moment and just really touch on the second verse A that happens. So this second verse A here that happens is essentially really the same as the first verse A, except I just added a few more layers to kind of thicken up the chords and just create a little bit of variation from the first verse A that happened. And it sounds like this. Cool, so as you probably heard, it kind of has a lot more of a build-up in it than the first verse A does, and also a few more layers. So we have that original pad playing. We also have this chord sound, this kind of super sorry type chord sound that was introduced during verse B and during the drop previously. layered with also a choir sound. Sounds like this. I'm just using a default Ableton kind of choir patch there, which does the job for this kind of a thing. And then 2 ARP sounds. One is more kind of plucky, sounds like this. And the second one is more like kind of trancey, sounds like this. For both of these, I'm actually just using the same chord MIDI that I had previously and just chucking a arpeggiator MIDI effect on them, which just makes life easier than having to write in all of the different MIDI notes. And it means you can do things like I have with this first ARP sound here, like automate the gate of this arpeggiator, which essentially makes each of the different notes that are playing longer or shorter, so you can make it more plucky or less plucky, and you can again kind of build that tension, which I have done, as you can see in this second half of this ARP sound here. The processing on them is fairly straightforward, just some delay and some reverb and some filtering, and just to bring it kind of in over the course of this verse to build up towards the verse B. In this verse, we don't bring in the bass the second half, but we do bring in the guitar melody, and we kind of change it up towards the end a little bit, just to repeat that kind of little turnaround at the end of the guitar melody. Just to kind of, again, build some of that tension up. We have that kind of background ambience that's going on as well, and right at the start of this verse, kind of as a way to transition out of the drop that just came before it, we have this sub drop here, which is just a really, really basic operator patch, just a sine wave being distorted and a pitch bend on it. I make my sub drops a little bit differently now, so maybe I'll do a video on that later on. And then the outro as well is essentially the same as those verse A parts, just with some drums in there to try and give it a little bit of a outro-y type feel. And this makes sense in the context of the track, which if you go and listen to it, you'll be able to hear it. Okay, so that's a little breakdown of the verse A sections of the tune Simulation that I released the other month, back in December of 2019, which, again, if you haven't checked out, go and do so now before you watch the second video of this series, which will come out pretty soon. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Turn on the subscription notifications so that you get notified as soon as the next video in this series drops, which I'll be breaking down the verse B sections, which are a little bit more intense, and then we'll probably be doing the build-ups and then the drops, which probably will be the longest video of this series. As always, hope you're having a good one. Make sure to stay up to date with me over on Instagram and everything like that, and I'll catch you in the next video.